Hello and welcome to the Car Care channel, and welcome to this 2010 Toyota Corolla. Really nice Corolla model. But this particular Corolla have spent 2 weeks at the dealership for a very strange problem that they ended up not being able to figure out. And it's a very long story. Let's start with the video. We'll talk about the problem, we'll diagnose it, hopefully figure it out, and fix it if we figure out what it is right after this. Let's talk briefly about the backstory of this car. This is a one-owner car. Owner owned it since it was new. Love the car, drives great. It has just over 100,000 miles, not even a lot of miles. Here's the problem with this car. Every once in a while, all kinds of warning lights come on and the gauges just go dead. Nothing, no speedometer, no tachometer, nothing. The gauges just completely go dead and all kinds of warning lights come on. Car runs fine, but that happens. And then sporadically it would come on and off, on and off. Customer took it to a dealership, which serviced this car since it was new. Hey, we're having this problem. Initially, he was not doing it. They told him, sorry, can't duplicate, have a nice day. But then he was doing it, and they saw it. They kept the car for 2 weeks, trying to figure out what's going on. Eventually, it fixed itself. Let me just say one thing. No car fixes itself. But equally, I am not just going to go and say the dealership completely botched this and didn't do this right. Folks, when it comes to diagnosis, intermittent issues, the dealership pay system for the technicians, it works against them. You can't spend 3 days driving this car waiting for the problem to happen to then diagnose it and hopefully figure it out in the time you have. Well, you're not getting paid for that. The only way to get paid for that is to charge the customer, and we're not going to charge you 24 hours of labor just to diagnose a car. That's not realistic. So this is where problems like this, unfortunately diagnosing them at dealerships, becomes tough. And I get it. When it's under warranty, the manufacturer will pay. But when it's not in warranty, what do you do? Especially when the problem just goes away. Here is just looking at this problem. I'm going to give you a second to I'm going to show you a clip of what it's doing first, and then I'm going to give you a second as a DIY. I know a lot of my viewers are awesome DIYers. What do you think it is? When you see that, I just want you to walk you through the mental process of diagnosis. This is what the car is doing. What do you think is going on? See, the number one thing is, what part do we replace? You should never do that. That is the biggest mistake, because I've seen this a lot. Let's go replace the gauge. It was probably just the gauge dying. How do you know that? That's a guess, and that's the thrown parts of the car. My guess, when I first look at this car, there's a problem with the network. And let us start diving into this car a little bit, and I'll explain how the CAN network works so we can really get into that diagnostic mind and start to understand where do we start with this problem. Let's talk about this magical network called CAN communication. Stands for Controller Area Network. It's basically a network between the computers so they can communicate back and forth. See, in the olden days, when one system in a car needed to communicate with another, there was a herd of wire in between them to activate each single thing. Like when you hit unlock, the little computer that controls the lock unlock, it had wires going to the lights, wires going to each individual lock to lock and unlock. But now we don't have that, because then you'll have a lot of wires running all over the place. Now the computers can talk to each other, and the way they talk to each other is on a network called CAN. That's what that is. Let me put a diagram of the network of this particular car right here on the screen so you can see it. So I want you to look at the top and the bottom of this tree. That looks very complicated, but bear with me. The very top, you have combination meter, and it says 120 ohms underneath it. Combination meter in Toyota language is the gauge. At the very bottom, you have ECM, engine control module. That's the engine computer. Also has 120 ohms right next to it. These are kind of the hubs. These are the two components that establish this network. They have a resistor that is 120 ohms. That's what makes the network communicate. That's the main two hubs that make this network work. You notice how all the other components are tied into it. So let's talk logic here a little bit. If I cut the combination meter out of the picture, or I cut the ECM out of the picture, we do not have a network anymore. The network is down permanently because you need these two to establish the network. But if any of the other components gets unplugged, the network will still be working, but that one device we do not have communication with anymore. Does that make sense? I hope it does, because CAN communication is one of those systems that a lot of technicians do not see it, do not comprehend it to a point where it just frustrates them and they don't know where to begin, and they just get very frustrated and they just walk away from it, or start throwing parts until something fixes something. It's actually not that complicated if you approach it with calm and trying to understand how it works. But let's look at this very network. The network has two wires, CAN high and CAN low. And if you see these wires inside the car in the wiring loom, there'll be a wire twisted together. That is your CAN communication wire. It's basically a glorified wire for your computer to communicate, the Cat 5, Cat 6, whatever. It's just two wires. It's very simple. Network is very slow. So let us, for a second, start with one important thing. When you connect your scan tool to the OBD2 connector, which you see it, DLC3, that is OBD2 connector, you're only tying into the network. So if your combination meter is not working or your ECM is not working, the network is down, therefore your scan tool will not communicate with the car. But if your combination meter is coming on and your car is starting, they are likely working. And we're going to start with testing. And the biggest test what we're going to be testing for is, we don't really need the combination meter itself to work properly. We only need the terminating resistor that is inside of it to work properly for the network to be established. The first thing we want to check, we want to isolate out of this network in this particular car, is going to be, is my combination meter terminating resistor proper? Is my ECM resistor working? Nothing else. We don't want to go replace a combination meter. We don't want to go replacing an engine computer. We start with a basic test. And here's how that test is going to be. You're just going to put your meter across these two CAN high, CAN low, these two wires that you see go up and down. And we're going to measure resistance. Because you have 120 and 120, the magic number we're looking for is 60 ohms. The easiest way to check it is the OBD2 connector. It's right in front of you. It's not a device. You're not going to unplug something and test. It's right there. You just hook onto the lines and check it with a regular meter. So let's go do that, and then we'll walk through the diagnostic process so we can figure this car out, and I hope we can fix it. So we're going to measure the resistance across CAN high and CAN low. The easiest way to do that is the OBD2 connector. I am going to take it out because I want to probe it from the back, not from the front, so we wouldn't loosen the pins. We're going to set our meter to ohms. Car is off, keys out of the ignition, battery still connected. We're just going to check the resistor. I have 59.6.7. We're going to call that 60 ohms. I don't have a problem with the combination meter. I don't have a problem with the ECM. So let's move on to our next test. So now that we know that our terminating resistors are good, we're going to move on to the next test. The next test is, do we have one of these components putting power on the CAN network? Because it's not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to have a short to power on either the CAN high or CAN low. So here's how we're going to test that. You can't just go to the positive terminal on the battery. You want to test the computer power signal. So we're going to actually take it off of here, but the battery is disconnected in case there's 12 volts and your meter has a malfunction. You could fry all kinds of stuff. So the negative terminal is disconnected. Let's test it and see. So the magic number we're looking for is basically either open or a very, very high resistance, like over 60 kilo ohms or something like that. Let us see what we see. I'm going to connect to the pin 16 of the OBD2 connector, which is always positive, and the first one. This one I have 9.95 mega ohms. Let me translate that. that's not a short. That's, yeah. If you're into electrical stuff, you'll know that that's, yeah. Now let's go on the other pin of the network. This one is also 9.95 mega ohms. So we do not have a short to power. Then the next thing we're going to check is short to ground. So here's how we're going to check ground. There's a pin here called CG. That is the ground we're going to use because we want the ground from the network, not the car's ground. So I'm going to first find that one. Here it is. And then we're going to measure. Once I am able to get it, these pins are really small. There we go. It's like barely making good contact. I have 65 ohms, which is good. Car is off. That is the reading you're actually in the book. That is the reading you're supposed to get. Now let's go look at the other one. Once I get a good connection on these, they're really tough to get. Okay, we have a problem, folks. We have 6.8 ohms. So that is a short to ground on one of the lines of the network. That's going to jam up everything. Now, we know that it's not the combination meter. We know it's not the ECM. Now, the ECM is obvious. Combo meter, it's coming on. So if you have a short, it's not going to work. Now, here's the problem with this type of CAN communication issues. You hook up a scan tool, it's not going to communicate with the car. And that is your biggest telltale sign that your network is down. Now, obviously, when you connect to the OBD2 connector, in case you don't know this, and there's no communication, check the OBD2 fuse. That's what powers this. If that's out, obviously, it's not going to communicate. But in this case, of course, that fuse is good. We have no communication. The car doesn't even get picked up by the scan tool, like you don't have it plugged in, because there's no communication with the car. It's similar to not having it plugged in. So that's your biggest telltale sign. Network is down. And when the network is down, skip all the formalities, start checking the basics. I see so many technicians immediately jump into conclusions. Well, let me unplug this, let me unplug that. Well, do you even know there's a problem? Because if your resistors are not good, let's kind of play a scenario here. You check the resistance across the two network wires, you have 120 ohms. Immediately you're going to go and unplug your computer, your engine computer, which is a terminating resistor, and then unplug this. You should have 0 at that point. Plug one of them in, you should have 120. Unplug it, plug the other one. If you do not have 120, that is your problem. Simple as that. So now that we know what our problem is, we know we have a short to ground in one of the network wires. Here's when things get slightly complicated. They're not very complicated, but time consuming. You have one of the components on this network that is potentially causing this, or you have a wire that is broken somewhere. So the easiest thing to do in this case is to go leave the terminating resistors on. You're going to go component by component that you see here on this diagram. Let's pull that diagram again. You're going to disconnect component by component, because these components, remember, when you disconnect them from the network will still be alive, because these are branches off of it. They're not the main two. You should never unplug the main two until you've unplugged all of them and you still have your problem. Then unplug the main two. If you still have your problem, where these wires should be now connected to nothing, then you know your problem is in the actual wiring. And that's when things get a little complicated, because now you're chasing wires and disassembling half the car to check what's going on. But that is your diagnostic approach. Now here's where experience plays in a little bit. Out of these components that you see, let's look at this diagram real quick. Out of all of these components that you see, by the way, AC amplifier is the AC computer, that's what it's called in Toyota language. Which one do you think is the one that moves the most? I'm going to give you a second to think about it. Look at this. The only one of all these components that moves all the time is the steering angle sensor. Every time you move the steering, it's moving. So this is where you have a hunch. And you know what? We can go and disassemble half the dash and pull the AC amplifier out and the airbag computer out and slowly disconnect. But let's just go after our hunch, because this is a movable part. Maybe that's what, and we get lucky. So the steering angle sensor is behind the steering. So let us go straight into it, unplug it, and then recheck and see. Now I'm not going to recheck with the meter, because now you know what the problem is. You're actually, and that's speaking of the meter, see, you got jealous. It's telling me you kept it on for too long. We're actually going to turn the key on and see if the problem goes away when we unplug it. If not, we'll move on to the next component, and eventually we'll tear half this car apart to go component by component. Let's hope we get lucky with our first hunch. So the steering angle sensor first is connected right here. Once we are able to get this. So here's the steering angle sensor. I'm going to unplug it. And let's see if we have lights. I already see the gauges moving. Did we just get lucky? Let me start this car. We have gauges, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see if this was what the dealership was having when it was intermittent. I'm going to plug it back in. This car needs the throttle body clean after we disconnected the battery. Barely staying running, the gauges are dead again. And the best part is, one of the things that I noticed also, to turn the key on, doesn't tell you park, neutral, reverse, because nothing is communicating with nothing. The way the gauge gets its transmission position is through the network from the transmission computer. Well, this one is not getting nothing. Let's disconnect it. Did we really get this lucky? Yeah, did you hear that? The key started chiming, because now the immobilizer computer is communicating on the network, telling the gauge, because that chime you hear, that beeping, that's actually in the gauge, in the combination meter itself. So now the network is working. The immobilizer computer is telling the gauge, hey, there's a key in the ignition. But when I plug this in and the network is jammed, there's nothing. Watch what happens when I unplug it. And take a minute for it to communicate. Let's try it again. It's back. Do you see that? Wow, we got really lucky on this one. The first component we tried was the one which we did kind of do a common sense, I suppose. When I told you this is the part that moves, every time you turn your wheel, that component is moving. So the chances of it getting and having an issue are high. I mean, the AC computer, it's not going anywhere. It's sitting. Yes, it's moving with the car, but it's not physically moving inside. So this is our issue. Now, in the case of this car, folks, we've already diagnosed this. I just wanted you to see the diagnostic process that we went through to figure this out. And it didn't take long. So, because I did exactly what I showed you in this video. We arrived at this. We used common sense. We got lucky. We're good. So I already have the part for this. We're going to go ahead and replace it right now. We're verify our repair. We still got to clean the throttle body. But I want to take a moment to say something about the dealership that had this car for 2 weeks, could not figure it out, and eventually said, well, just fix itself, we're done. I'm not going to go hard on them on this one, because first, I don't have this piece of information. Was it coming in and out, or was it continuously, like it is right now for us, continuously having the issue? Did they really try to drive it for 2 weeks to have the issue to happen? That part's unclear. But I worked at a dealership in the past. I know how things go. they don't allot you the time. You're trying to focus on a car like this, and then they're so busy at dealerships, they're trying to pull you to do something else. They never let you really spend the time with the car. That is one scenario. The second scenario is they give a car like this to a junior technician that really, they're still learning. They don't understand how CAN communication works. And when you open the repair manual, it is extremely complicated. And everybody, all the older techs, will tell you any CAN communication problems or communication codes are very complicated to figure out. And oh my God, that's it. Your family will be eating bread for the rest of the month because you'll lose all your pay. So they're kind of taught to be afraid of CAN communication. I will not deny the fact that some CAN communication problems, like when you get into disconnecting everything and you still have an issue and the wires are the issue, or intermittent issues, they are time consuming. They're not difficult to find, but they're very time consuming. And that's the problem with these. I'm not going to put this one on the dealership because I know how CAN communication problems can go. In this particular case, the car cooperated with us. It was doing the symptoms. We were able to completely duplicate it and figure out what's going on. But let's go replace that steering angle sensor, clean that throttle body, double check the car one more time. And I think we'll call this one done. So steering angle sensor is actually mounted to the spiral cable or clock spring. That's a more generic word for it. Spiral cable is a Toyota word. So we're going to start by removing the steering wheel, which means we got to start with the airbag. Somebody's been here and over tightened this guy. That is not good. That is way over tight. Wow, is what I'm gonna say here. This is way over tight. Let's try this again. Really have a bad feeling about this. Wow, that is way too tight, folks. Okay, I think we have liftoff. Okay. Here's the airbag. Now we're gonna disconnect this 19 millimeter for the steering wheel. We're gonna put the steering wheel straight and not move the middle. So steering wheel just splined in. Here's the best way to remove it. Once you got the airbag out, give it a couple hits. Here it is. Comes right out. Now we're gonna unplug the rest of the stuff on the spiral cable, these two connectors, and we're gonna make sure, and I'll show you this up close once we get it off. There is a red marker on the spiral cable. As you turn it, that red marker appears when it's centered. So you get it out, I'll show you that red marker. This is very important. You do not want to remove the spiral cable out of a car when the steering wheel is not straight, because you'll damage it, and these things are not cheap. There we go. Get it up close so you can see that red marker. This is the one we're talking about. So here's this spiral cable. This is your airbag wires, your horn, if you have switches on the steering wheel. So when you turn the wheel, they still have connection. This is where those connect to. And then behind it, this is the steering angle sensor. And you see how it connects right here. So when I turn it, see how it turns with it? That's how it picks up the steering angle. So we're going to leave it straight. If it moves a little bit, it's fine, but as long as you don't lose your red. We're going to pop it out. Here's your steering angle sensor. That's all it is. And the connector that I was unplugging was this one. You know, look at this. It says Panasonic Toyota, so that is an original part. You do not want to put an aftermarket steering angle sensor. bad idea. Steering angle sensors do not, they calibrate. As soon as you turn the wheel left to right, full lock to lock, they calibrate what is the 0 point. So here's a new part. Let's put this one to the side. Let us replace it, install it in the car. I'm going to verify our repair. Important thing when you do one of these is you want to compare it. This looks exactly the same. I don't think we have any issues. It also says Panasonic, so this is definitely a correct one. It's actually the same part, number 2, so that's beautiful. Let us go and install it. Well, that is not sitting right. There we go. And it's as simple as that. Let's go get this back in the car. We'll assemble everything and we'll verify our repair. Okay, let's install this. It's plugged in. Let's plug in our angle sensor. Here's what I'm going to do. We don't need the steering wheel to start the car. Did you know that? Gauges are working and it's plugged in. We don't have any warning lights. Obviously the airbag light's going to stay on because our airbag is disconnected. So I think we are good. Tire lights flashing. That is something else. Actually going to connect the scan tool because this may take a minute to re-communicate on the network. But still idling really low. She's really not happy with us right now. So I am going to complete this complete. The easiest way to install these is put it on when there's no steering wheel. That's how you'll get these. And I see somebody already mangled it a little bit. You gotta be really gentle with these Corollas with the steering column covers because they are very flimsy. That's the, fortunately on these they really went flimsy. So let's install our steering wheel back. There we go. Push these bolts. Somebody really over tightened these. I really don't like that. These are not that tight, folks. Last but not least, little covers here. Horn works. I know that everything is working just from the beep. So I think this issue is officially fixed. We just gotta, let's go clean that throttle body and we'll call this one done. Let's, ooh, I see this one is cracked. Throttle body on this is super simple to access and to clean. And it looks like it hasn't been accessed or cleaned in a very long time. Ew. Ooh, that looks horrible. Alright, let's clean that. Let's get this throttle body. I feel like, just have a feeling. Is this the first time the throttle body gets clean? I think so. I just have a gut feeling about it. This looked horrible. Every time you disconnect the battery on a Toyota or a Lexus, pull the throttle body like this and clean it. Do have a video on that dedicated just to talking about the do's and don'ts. But every time you do this, clean the throttle body, otherwise the car won't idle right and you'll have all kinds of issues. And no, this is not a Nissan. You don't need to reset anything when you're done. It'll idle high for a few days and then it'll calm down on its own. This is much better. Let's put the intake back and I think we are good to go on this one. And there is that one issue fixed. Folks, there's one thing that I held off toward the end of the video of telling you, and this is something you're going to run into with a lot of dealerships and repair shops. At the very end, when this customer picked up the car, the dealership told him, problem fixed itself, we can't find what's going on. This car has an aftermarket alarm that we think is causing the issue. Let me just tell you one thing about that. That is the 100% way of frustration. Basically, we're going to send you off, we don't know what's going on, or we can't really spend more time with it. Just let's blame it on this aftermarket thing and let's move the car out. Now, the owner of this car told the dealership, but you guys installed this aftermarket alarm or remote start when I bought the car from you 14 years ago. So what's going on here? Of course, they just told him, you got to remove it, and we don't deal with that contractor that installed this for us because there's an aftermarket alarm remote start deal. So the owner actually went to another place, had the aftermarket alarm and remote start, which worked perfectly fine, removed, and the very next day the car did the same thing. That is potentially the only part that I'll put to the dealership, because that has nothing to do with that. I mean, these alarms don't even... It's very easy to disconnect it from the CAN network. Some of these do connect on the network so they can hijack the signal of the key and they're able to start the car because these things have immobilizer. You can easily disconnect that because you see the two white and black wires wrapped up. You just unplug it, leave it unplugged. Tell the customer, we unplugged your aftermarket alarm in case it is the component that is causing this issue. But that's the only place where the aftermarket alarm will actually potentially tap into the network. But if we establish that our problem from the beginning was the network, and you could have easily unplugged that and it didn't take our short, well, then that has nothing to do with that. But they didn't, and God bless them for it. Look, folks, I understand this type of diagnosis. It could go well, it could go really well, or it could go very badly. I would say this one is a medium one. I did a lot of these diagnoses back at the dealership, and I still do here. You just have to go in with an open mind that we're going to erase everything from the background, from our previous experiences. Some of them were good, some of them were not good. And go with a clear mind. We're going to get to the bottom of this. We are professionals. We're going to take things calmly, and slowly things will unfold and you'll find it. And sometimes you'll find something and you'll assume it is it, and then it doesn't go that way. That's why you got to talk to your customer, basically. When you're going nowhere with a car, you got to talk to the customer. Hey, this is a very complicated problem. You got to give me more time. It's going to cost you more money, because I'm not going to... If this was the case, if I was the dealership, we're not going to spend 2 weeks working on this car for a diagnosis fee. Usually they'll charge you an hour of labor, whatever that labor charge is, an hour of labor of diagnostic to find out what's going on. But if we're going to work on this for 2 weeks, well, they only charge you for an hour. That's how you also, as a consumer, have to look at it. However, this was too simple. So it makes me think they either gave it to a junior tech or it didn't do it. Because there is no way that this would have went 2 weeks. I mean, it took me probably a couple hours of investigating, checking around, looking around, figured it out, did basically what we showed you in the video. Now, of course, in this video, we were directly at it, but there was some other stuff you got to look into and check. One of them is modifications. We were looking inside the car, and if you noticed, I had the dash cam unplugged, because we've seen cases where aftermarket accessories that plug into the power outlet will cause some kind of interference, and it'll cause all kinds of strange behavior from the car. So if you have issues like this, that strange behavior like that, unplug everything that you have plugged in the power outlets. Trust me, we have seen cases with radios acting up when you use an aftermarket USB cable and all kinds of other stuff. Folks, I hope this video was helpful, informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some other videos. Until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.